tell, do you see the road? I'm out to my soul into the sides whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 16th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets High School DxD. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on fanfiction.net. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Now give me one reason to not end your pathetic life right now. Sirius, Remus, and Tonks looked at the group of people who came out of the house, silently inquiring them to do something. But to their horror, no one moved as some looked at the redhead with nothing but disdain, disgust or hatred. There were 2 or 3 who looked gleefully at the scene with a bloody grin on their faces. 2 people, however, weren't. Lily opened her mouth, either to take another breath or answer no one no, but then a new voice echoed from behind Harry which stopped him in his moment. Onizen. Freezing, Harry slowly turned his furry head to look at the voice's owner who was none other than little Asia, whose green eyes looked at him with a hint of fear but mostly with pure concern. It was something he didn't like to see in the former nun's eyes, as he hated it when people were scared of him. Slowly, his body shifted back to his normal one as he unconsciously released his grip around Lily's neck. His attention was fully on the former nun. The English redhead landed on the ground with a thump and a groan before massaging her painful neck while breathing loudly. As she rubbed her sore neck, Lily couldn't help but shooting a glance at her eldest son as she was wondering what had happened to him during all those years. The redhead was also shocked and terrified by the power she felt from him. However, she knew right ahead that it wasn't his full potential, as he didn't broken a sweat, and knew that Harry was more powerful than even Dumbledore and Voldemort united together. Her part of her was filled with pride by how strong her eldest son became, but a good part was still ashamed by her past choices. Then her attention turned to the young girl who, albeit unconsciously, saved her from her son's wrath, and had to admit that she was pretty cute and didn't look older than 14 or 15 years old in age. While she was busy looking at the blonde young girl, Remus and Tonks had rushed forward to help the redhead to get back on her feet, while Harry was approaching Asia, who was still looking up at her older brother figure with nothing but concern in those green eyes of hers. With a soft smile, the young raven-haired young man opened his arms in a welcoming manner, and the former nun didn't need it to be told twice as she literally lunged at him, enveloping her arms around his waist as tight as she could while nuzzling his chest. Chuckling to himself, Harry used a hand to pat the top of Asia's head, earning himself a big smile from the former nun which warmed his heart considerably. She was just too innocent and cute for her own good. Once again Asia-chan manages to calm down the big bad lion. She sure has you in her fingers, Harry-kun Naya, Kuroka commented with amusement as she stood near her younger sister, Kaneko/Chiron, who shot her an annoyed yet amused glance out of the corner of her eyes. Right when it was becoming more interesting, Akeno mumbled with disappointment as she crossed her arms under her melons, pouting. The sight of it caused both Remus and Sirius to nosebleed until they both received a slap at the back of their heads from an annoyed and amused Nymphadora Tonks, who was internally a bit jealous at not having a chest this large. She could when she used her metamorphogus power, but naturally her chest was not really big. Back to the group, Rias shot an amused sideway glance toward her queen before looking back at Harry and Asia, who just pulled away from each other. "Thank you, little one, I almost lost myself there," the raven-haired young man inquired to the former nun with affection as he patted the top of her head. "Ano, always happy to help Onizen," Asia retorted softly with a hint of both happiness and embarrassment as a hint of pink appeared on her cheeks. The sight of it made her even cuter than she already were. "So you are the human woman you abandoned my mate as a baby?" A cold and emotionless feminine voice echoed from nearby, which caught everyone's attention as they turned their heads to see who had spoken. It was Ophis, and while she had her familiar straight face, Harry could easily detect the anger radiating from her as the infinite dragon god made her way toward Lily, who, along with Remus and Tonks, had frozen in fright as the power emanating from the small lowly-like girl. The two wizards and witches were paling drastically as they felt Ophus's power, which was really terrifying. And with her glaring at Lily with an emotionless face didn't help in soothing them. Not by a long shot. Ophus wasn't the only one glaring at the English witch though. Kuroka, Tiamat, Kaneko, Rainier and some of the others present were as well. Harry's girlfriends, at least those who are there right now, looked ready to kill her on the spot if their lover asked them to. Ravel's eyes burned with a strong fire that could incinerate whatever she wanted if it was possible. However, before anything could happen, a certain Gremory heiress we all love stepped forward to prevent anything to happen as she asked in a stern tone while releasing a bit of her power in an intimidating manner. "Why are you all here?" There was a lot of coldness in her tone as her blue eyes were staring at Lily, who looked back at the younger woman with a bit of fright as she had never felt such a power before. While it was weaker than her son's, it was still really scary. "And who are you, young woman?" "Last time I checked it was Harry's mansion," Sirius asked with narrowed eyes before a flash of remembrance passed through his mind. "Are you one of Harry's girls by any chance?" Rias, who had opened her mouth to answer the first question, instantly blushed madly when the dark man asked her if she was one of Harry Quenn's girlfriends and found herself unable to say a proper word as she was really embarrassed at the moment. Thankfully for her, her beloved queen and best friend, Akeno Himejima, stepped forward to save her king from her predicament as she made her way toward Harry. Era sadly she is not, but I am fufufu." Akeno literally purred in ravishment at Sirius before swiftly grabbing her boyfriends by the cheeks to pull him into a deep kiss. Harry, who had been a bit taken aback by the sudden action, instantly responded by kissing her back as fiercely as possibly gaining himself a of pleasure from Rias' queen. Akeno, as she was kissed by her man, could feel the envious glares from her HRM sisters but ignored them in favor of savoring the taste of Harry's lips against hers. Sirius, Remus, Tonks and Lily gaped at the sight as their faces reddened at the display of play currently taking place in front of them. While the former three knew that Harry had girlfriends in plural, they didn't have the chance to meet one of them. Until now that it. "DMN, she is gorgeous," Lord Black whispered in disbelief to his old partner in crime, who stupidly nodded in response as the werewolf was unable to say a proper word. Tonks shot her boyfriend an amused look, but she too was in shock at the sight of the other young woman who possessed curves every girls would die to have. Yes, she was a bit jealous, but thankfully she could replicate it thanks to her being a metamorphmagus. Lily, for her part, was also unable to form words as her green eyes were looking at the kissers with shock and disbelief. While Sirius and Remus told her that her eldest son had a girlfriend, she didn't believe them when they told her that Harry had a HRM. She hadn't expected such a literal bimbo. The girl was dressed with inappropriate clothes which revealed a lot of her melons and a bit of her rather large assets. A bit of her maternal instinct slowly resurfaced as her eyes narrowed at the girl who finally stopped kissing her baby and was about to give her a piece of her mind when something unexpected happened. "Hey! Stop hogging him all to yourself." Another girl, who had a slender body with a large bust, another bimbo. Violet eyes and long silky black hair down to her peach, scowled the first girl before kissing her eldest son right on the lips in a possessive manner. It was Rainier, the fallen angel. Lily's face turned even redder at the sight of another girl kissing her eldest son on the lips and again was unable to say a word as it seemed that Sirius and Remus were right. Harry does have multiple girls. Sirius's soft whistle could be heard echoing in the air, but no one paid attention to it as they were all focused on Harry and Rainier. Then when Lily managed to regain her composure, another gorgeous woman approached her eldest son. The newcomer was equally an appealing young woman with a voluptuous figure. Ugh. What was it with Japanese girls? Long black hair with split bangs, and hazel gold eyes with cat-like pupils. The English witch also noticed the pair of cat ears at the top of the girl's head. Lily then started to study the new girl with narrowed eyes. Her attire consisted of a black kimono, a yellow obi, a set of golden beads, and an ornately detailed headband. The kimono had a red interior and it is open at her shoulders, giving view to her large melons, which was as large as the first two girls. Lily was becoming more and more unnerved with the girls her son had chosen as girlfriends, as none of them were wearing proper clothes like decent ladies should, and in fact, they all looked like wares or hussies. That was Molly Weasley would say for sure anyway. Rainier, please let the poor man breath at least. Naya, the new girl, scowled the kissing one, whose name was apparently Rainier. The girl in question, pulled away from Harry's lips with a pout while grumbling something inaudible under her breath. The cat girl grinned triumphantly at the pouting young woman before looking back at Harry, who was catching his breath. You okay, Harry-kun? Naya. I'm fine, Kuroka, I'm fine. Harry began to answer before a pair of lips crashed against his, interrupting him in the process. Kuroka grinned at her lover once she pulled herself away from him after a few seconds, and he shot her a fake annoyed glare. You cheeky little kitten, Harry inquired to her with affection as he petted the top of her head, scratching behind her ears, earning a purr of content from the neck issue. Ravel Phoenix was looking at the scene with pure jealousy, as she also wanted to have a piece of Lord Peveril. It was no secret that she developed a crush on him ever since that day he challenged Riser Phoenix, her older brother, in single combat. She was extremely happy when she became his apprentice, as it gave her the possibility to be even closer to him. A small smirk grew on her face as she slightly licked her lips. Soon, she will become one of his girls. Then two other people approached Harry, Tiamat and Ophis. None of them tried to kiss him, but they did hug him tightly yet gently, with the cow's karma dragon starting first. Ophis, however, was still glaring daggers at Lily, who ignored the loli-like dragon god as her narrowed eyes were locked on the girl standing next to her son. Harry James Potter. How could you chose some bimbos as your girls? The English redhead asked him in a stern tone as she placed her hands on her peach to show how serious she was at the moment, momentarily forgetting that Harry had another name after he cast himself out of the Potter line. Instantly, a strong killing intent was felt radiating from Harry's body as he turned his face to glare furiously at her with glowing eyes. His eyes were not feral looking like they did a few minutes ago, but the amount of rage and coldness from them was just as scary. My name is Harry Peveril Gryffindor Ravenclaw Slytherin Emery's Lefay, not Harry James Potter woman. Harry replied in a cold tone while saying his former name with nothing but disgust, as if it was a plague. And you have no say in my life either, he added with a snarl which caused Lily to recoil in fright, especially when the group accompanying her son glared at her with hatred and anger. Well, Harry, can we talk to you? It's really important, Sirius said in an attempt to change the subject. While he was enjoying seeing Lily Evans Potter being scowled like a child by his godson, there were important matters to discuss about at the moment. Mainly about Dumbledore, the Order, or what was left of it, of the frying chicken, and the stupidity that was the wizarding world. Harry glanced away from his girlfriends to look back at his godfather, who, for once, harbored a serious, no pun intended, look on his face. He noticed the pleading look on both Remus's and Tonks's faces and couldn't help but feeling a strange familiar sensation from the inside. The last time it happened, he had to oppose something big or someone annoying. Sending a small prayer for any kind of mercy, Harry took a deep breath before looking back at the four English witches and wizards. All right, come in then, but keep her in line or I won't stop myself from disposing of her permanently, the young lord inquired to Sirius, Remus, and Tonks sharply as he narrowed his eyes at Lily, who instantly froze at the threat. Without another word, Harry turned his back on the newcomers before re-entering his home. He was quickly followed by the rest of his friends and girlfriends, and some of them shot a dangerous glare to Lily as if daring her to do anything against Harry. Left behind, Sirius released a deep sigh before glancing sideways at the green-eyed redhead. You had it coming, you know, he inquired to her before entering the mansion without waiting for an answer. He is right, you just had to insult his girls when he is already displeased to see you, Remus commented as he went to stand beside Lily, who quickly turned her head to stare at him the second he started speaking. But Remus the redhead tried to object as she couldn't understand how the werewolf could accept seeing Harry with girls who literally are showing parts of their bodies. She could understand Sirius, as Lord Black had always been a bit of a perv even during their times at Hogwarts, but Remus? Heck, even Tonks seemed okay with this. This is not our decision as to who he can date with or not. Harry is old enough to decide by himself. Remus interrupted her sharply but yet still in a soft tone. But I'm his mother. Lily retorted with anger as she momentarily forgot that her eldest son hadn't lived with her even since that fateful night years ago. Correction, you were his mother. Look at him now. He looks ready to kill you, Lily. Remus inquired harshly, and the redhead, who had opened her mouth to say something in objection, instantly went silent at the last part. Harry looked ready to harm her. The look on his face and eyes showed nothing but anger, hatred, and a promise of pain. There weren't holding any warmth toward her like he did back when he was a cute little baby. She had expected it, of course, but she had never thought that Harry would hate her that much. Another thing that shocked her was the appearance he took a few minutes ago. Never before she had seen such a creature who looked like a mix between a human and a feline, a lion to be precise. She even wondered how did he get that powerful as she did felt his aura. Lily felt a pang of sadness as she had another proofs of how Harry became without the love of his former family. While he did cast himself out of the Potter line, he was still the baby she gave birth, either he liked it or not. But even that wasn't enough to amend what she did. And she knew it. However, she suddenly blinked when she felt a hand on her shoulder, the left one, and titled her head to see Nymphadora. Don't call me that, Tonks, standing where Remus was a few seconds ago. The werewolf, after he said his part, had abandoned Lily to her thoughts to go after his longtime friend and fellow marauder Sirius Orion Black, entering the large building that was Harry's domain. The pink-haired young woman shot the older one a brief comforting smile before slowly following after her boyfriend and possibly future husband, leaving behind a silent Lily Evans Potter whose eyes followed the younger woman's departure until she disappeared inside the mansion. Sighing deeply, Lily gathered all her courage to follow after her fellow wizards and witches while secretly hoping Harry would at least hear her out, as it was as clear as water that he won't forgive her anytime soon. Time skip. So the old coot is coming here, Harry whispered softly to himself as he sat at the end of the dining table. All around him, sitting on chairs of their own, were his girlfriends minus Yasaka, Gabriel and Seraphal, his friends, Elmenhild, Sirius, Tonks, Remus and Lily. Not too far from him, a certain phoenix was being spoiled rotten by Asia and Gasper, while everyone harbored a grim look on their faces mixed with anger. Just a few moments ago, Sirius Black, after introductions, had told him of Dumbledore's plan, as Harry refused to hear anything from Lily, much to the latter's chagrin. Of course, he wasn't the only one to not hear her voice, as many had looked at her with disgust and hatred. After all of them knew about what she did in the past, so it was far from surprising. That's the main reason of why she wasn't allowed to speak, which had left Sirius to do it instead. First, he had complimented Harry for the letter, as, from what he said, he had never laughed so much in his life. Heck, even Remus had to admit that himself. Then, Lord Black told him what Dumbledore planned, mainly retrieving him to make him fight Moldashort. Needless to say how pissed Harry was at the old coot for not leaving him alone. Heck, his girls, again those present, were just as furious of this development. Once again, fate showed them how cowardly some wizards and witches were. Rias was even more disgusted of those people the more she heard about them. While their magic and abilities were outstanding, the people themselves were pathetic and unworthy to wield it. Ophis, Tiamat and Rainier, being among the oldest in age not physically, were as disgusted by the English wizards and witches, but they couldn't help but being a bit amused by their mentality. After all, it was really daring to claim themselves as the most powerful creatures in the world, when simple beings such as the zombies, or inferi as they are called in the wizarding world, could kill them. Lily Evans Potter, for her part, had been stunned when she first entered her eldest son's mansion, which was bigger than Potter Manor in terms of size and was also much more appealing to look out both inside and out. As much as she wanted to say something, either to start a small conversation with one of the people present or praises the mansion's beauty, she couldn't, as when she tried to, people would sneer at her. A sneer even her former friend Severus would be proud of. Lily couldn't blame any of them for how hostile they were toward her, as they all seemed to be really attached to Harry. Especially the girls she saw him kissing moments ago. In her mind, her son deserved a nice and well-behaved witch who would not show her body like those bimbos in public. There was another reason of her own resentment toward the girls: their perfect bodies made her seem flat and normal. In the wizarding world, she was known as one of the most attractive witches with nice assets and curves. And yet, Here she looked like a normal woman, granted she was still pretty in her opinion, but those girls were on another level in terms of beauty. Also, again in her mind, harems were abomination and things for perv minds. So imagine her shock when she saw those girls kissing Harry one by one. That won't do at all. In short, Lily wanted Harry to stop dating those girls to find instead a proper single girl to later get married. But she knew it won't happen, as her eldest son hated her with passion. He won't be listening to her, not now, not ever, and he proved it when he literally stopped her from saying a simple word when they all sat around the table. A part of them, the youngest people present, the cute blonde girl from earlier, a blonde-haired feminine boy, a white-haired cat girl who looked similar to the one who kissed her eldest son, and another white-haired girl with red eyes, all looked at her with different expressions. The first two were upset at her as they seemed really attached to Harry. The white cat girl hadn't stopped glaring at her with pure loath, while the last one merely sneered at her as if she was nothing but a mere insect. It was the last one that she was wary about, especially at the sight of the longer than normal canines. Lily knew she was a vampire, but different from the one she had seen before. This vampire was more noble looking than the vampires of England and possessed a strong power within her. Lily was curious of the girl, but again, she couldn't risk to ask questions, or else one of the people present minus her fellow English citizens would surely harm her. Rias himself seemed on edge as he couldn't stop glancing at the doll-like vampire with nervousness. Heck, the one time she looked at him, it was merely with hidden disgust. After all, werewolves and vampires weren't known to be best of friends. Another thing that bothered Lily was the white phoenix. Ever since the noble bird entered the room in a burst of flame, she was shocked. After all, phoenixes were really rare, so for her son to own one was showing how powerful he was. At first she thought Harry was light-sided, as phoenixes were creatures of pure light, but, from what her fellow English citizens said and what she saw so far, her eldest son was far from pure light-sided. In fact, if she was honest with herself, Lily had to admit her son was grey. Neither dark nor light. While she didn't hated the grey faction of the wizarding world, the English redhead couldn't help but feeling resentful toward them. They weren't fighting in the war and instead prefer to let others do it as if it wasn't their problems. For the light side, or a majority of them, the grey or neutral faction was filled with nothing but cowards and opportunists. Thankfully, there weren't a lot of neutrals in the wizarding world. Lily would have preferred her son to be light like his former family, but fate wasn't with her, as her eldest, unlike Albus or the rest of the Order of the Phoenix, didn't seem to mind killing people. Anyway, back to present, Sirius glanced at his longtime friend and fellow marauder before looking back at his godson, whose face was hidden behind a hand, clearly showing how exasperated he was. Yes, cub, when he learned, thanks to Lily over there, we came as fast as we could warn you. Harry sighed before slowly looking back at his godfather and asking in a serious tone. And I thank you for this, but do you know how many people are accompanying the old coot? This time it was Remus, the werewolf we all love, that answered the raven-haired green-eyed young man with a firm expression on his scarred face. From what a certain someone said, he glanced at Lily for that part before resuming. Not many people remained. There were Arthur and Molly Weasley, Minerva McGonagall, James Potter, and 4 others adults. Is that all? Harry asked them with a raised brow. As for him, 9 adults weren't such a threat. Heck, compared to what Muerte made him fight against, it was child play. A shiver ran down his spine at the souvenir of the primordial deity of death summoning a DMN basilisk when he was only 10 years old. And that's a mere fraction of Muerte's SDSM. Somewhere, the primordial deity of death sneezed rather loudly as she watched another episode of Sailor Moon. Not there are 4 more people: Ron Weasley, the youngest male of the family and a complete git, Hermione Granger, who is considered as the brightest witch of her age, Ginny Weasley, the youngest Weasley, and finally her boyfriend Jacob Potter, your brother. Tonks responded with a groan as if she was having a headache just by mentioning those people. Let them come. We will end them in an instant. Issei claimed loudly with a grin of confidence which was mirrored by some of the people present. Sirius, Remus, and Tonks glanced at each other with understanding as more and more people around them started to cheer in agreement for the brown-haired perv's words. You can't. Albus is the strongest wizard alive, Minerva is the transfiguration teacher at Hogwarts and James is a top Auror. You stand no chance. Lily retorted with disbelief as she couldn't believe those young people would just dismiss the wizards as if they weren't even a threat. But what shocked her, Sirius, Remus and Tonks was their reactions once she stopped talking. They laughed rather loudly too as if she had said something fun. Even Ophis had allowed a soft chuckle to escape her mouth as she shook her head in amusement. Those mortals were sometimes really entertaining. But still annoying. Everyone at the table, even the Phoenix, laughed at the god-smacked faces the English people were making at the instant but mostly because of what Lily said. Please ma'am, we fought things far worse than that. The brown-haired boy, who was introduced earlier as Issei Hayadu inquired from his seat while beside him. Both Kiba and Zenobia nodded in agreement with their comrade's words. Like what? Tonks asked them with a frown but her eyes were shining with curiosity. Remus and Sirius also looked at them, waiting for an answer, and even Lily looked at the younger people with confusion. What could be worse than Dumbledore and the Order? Well, maybe the Dark Lord and the Death Eaters, but it was surely not the case. Let's see, we fought against fallen angels, an arrogant pureblood devil, the Norse god Loki, the world serpent, Fenrir and his sons. Rias listed with a firm expression on her pretty face as she tickled her chin in consideration. Harry couldn't help but grinning at the disbelieved faces of his guests as they stared at them all with amazement, shock and bewilderment. But then he saw his former mother's eyes narrowed as she eyed them all sternly. Will you just stop lying and just tell us the truth for Merlin's sake? The English redhead hissed at them as she crossed her arms. Beside her, Remus and Sirius exchanged a quick glance while Tonks smacked her face with a hand muttering something about idiots. Rias narrowed her eyes in slight anger at being called a liar as she went on her feet, gesturing her peerage to do the same, which they did wholeheartedly as they all glared at Lily for having the gall to insult their king. Then to the English wizards and witches' shock, bat-like wings appeared in thin air on the young people's back. Akeno, for course, had one bat wing and a black feathery one. Rainier grinned at the god-smacked faces of the newcomers as she went back on her feet before summoning her own wings, black feathery ones. Lily was staring at the wings with horror. Her parents were Christians and she knew of the creatures of the Bible, angels, devils and fallen angels, but like her sister, Petunia, she never believed in those things as she thought it was nothing but rubbish. And now she was seeing true devils and a fallen angel. And all of them were friends with her eldest son. Worse, she just remembered that one of the devils along with the fallen angel were two of Harry's girls. Thanks to her parents, the English redhead knew that devils were creatures of darkness, created by Lucifer himself, while fallen angels were basically angels kicked out of heaven for dark reasons. And with her being a member of a light family, it was logical that she would react like this. Harry, get away from them. Now! Lily cried out to her son as she pulled out her wand, pointing them at the group who growled in anger at the sight of it. However, much to her surprise, Harry didn't react and instead was glaring dagger at her right in the eyes. And why should I? He asked her in a cold tone that sent shivers down the wizard's and witches' spine. They are dark creatures. Evil and twisted. Lily retorted with a frown as she looked at her eldest son in confusion. And they are more human than you. Harry snarled back with contempt as he glared in disgust at his mother, who recoiled as if she had been slapped. You call them dark, but you are worse. You claim to be light when your actions are not. You are as hypocritical as that foolish old coot. At least, they don't abandon their children because of a senile man, he added with a glare that could possibly melt ice as his green eyes turned more feral. The English redhead wanted to protest, but at the glares she was receiving from a good portion of the people present and the warning glances she got from her fellow witch and wizards, she knew she had to back down right now or else things will get worse. And beside, Harry's words shattered her heart as she knew he was right. What she did in the past was disgusting and she knew it. She shouldn't have trusted Albus back then because now her precious baby hated her, and rightfully so. With a deep sigh, Lily Evans Potter turned her head away, accepting her defeat. Harry huffed in satisfaction while the rest didn't, kept their narrowed eyes away from the English redhead. You know Harry, I am having trouble processing that she gave BRTH to you, Kiba inquired softly to the raven-haired young lord, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. Hearing this, Lily bristled in indignation as she knew she was being insulted, but to her sadness, her son snorted in agreement before saying, "Sadly, we cannot choose who give BRTH to us, Kiba. We can choose who our family is, but not who you are related with by BLD. And now you sound like an old man," Issei commented with a hint of humor as a grin appeared on his face. "Oh really?" Harry asked back teasingly with a grin that instantly caused the brunette boy to pale in slight fear. "I think I will shut up right now," the perv instantly shot in alarm as he raised his hands in surrender. "Party breaker," Harry grumbled under his breath with a slight pout as he mockingly glared at Issei. Of course, everyone else stared at the scene with amusement as they acting like children. The youngest ones, Asia and Gasper, particularly giggled at the silly exchange, and even Hedwig couldn't retain herself from thrilling in amusement. But then the moment was broken by a familiar Gremory heiress we all grew to love and cherish dearly. "This is funny and all, but I think we have important things to do right now," Rias commented with seriousness as she looked at everyone. "Do we have to?" Harry mock-whined at the redhead, who narrowed her eyes at him in response. Fine, you one cough, Riri cough," the young lord inquired back before saying the last part with a hidden grin. Rias' appealing aqua-blue eyes twitched in annoyance at the nickname, but surprisingly let it slide for once as she looked back at the English wizards and witches. "We told you a moment ago of the things we fought against, but it was Harry-kun here who did most of them," the Gremory heiress inquired to them as she pointed at the raven-haired young lord with a finger. "How so?" Remus asked her with a curious raised brow from his seat as he wondered what Harry fought against. "He defeated an arrogant pureblood devil in single combat, fought and destroyed the fallen angel Cobabeel and some of his followers, he killed a large group of magicians along with a pureblood devil from the Leviathan family, he fought against Fenrir the giant wolf, he defeated Regulus the Nemean lion in a duel." As the list went on, Remus and women were unable to say a proper word as they were completely shocked at what they were hearing. Sirius didn't know a thing about mythology, so he had no clue of what that mean. But the other three, yes. Lily was looking at her with wide eyes. Being an intellectual by nature, she knew of the many mythologies Muggles created in the past. She, of course, recognized some of them, particularly the Nemean lion and the wolf Fenrir. The former being from the Greek mythology and the latter from the Norse one. While she had found the stories to be quite enjoyable, she had never thought about them to be real. But then she remembered that day many years ago when she and her family learned of magic's existence. If magic existed, then why not gods and goddesses? Lily thought to herself, but then frowned as her mind went deep in thought. Does this mind he existed as well? If that the case, she may have listened to her parents back then, as it could explain her recent problems. Remus, for his part, was just as stunned by what he was hearing. Having passed a lot of time in the Muggle world, he heard a great deal of the different mythologies written throughout time and himself had enjoyed reading some of them, particularly the Greek one. But like Lily, it was a shock to hear that the creatures of those stories existed for real. "I don't think I need to explain about Tonks, do I?" Maybe so. In short, the pink-haired young woman was completely in awe of what was being said. During her childhood, Nymphadora, thanks to her father Ted Tonks, had read a lot of stories from Greek, Christian and Norse mythology with a preference for the former as it was apparently easier to remember. Like the two mentioned above, Tonks was amazed by the fact those stories were real. In her heart, a bit of her child side started to boil as she looked at the redhead before her with an expression of curiosity. However, the second she opened her mouth to ask some questions, the black-haired cat-girl from earlier prevented her from doing so. "Don't forget about him facing Great Red," Kuroka inquired to the Gremory girl as she glanced at her lover, who chuckled a bit at her antic. "And that too," Rias conceded with an amused roll of her eyes. "Who is Great Red?" Sirius asked with a blank expression on his face as beside him, his fellow English were just as confused. Sending an exasperate glance at the others, after all, a part of wizards and witches, everyone in the supernatural world knew the dragon gods, Rias looked back at the four before answering nonchalantly. "Oh, just the apocalypse dragon and the most powerful creature in existence." At those words, Remus and witches gaped at them like goldfishes with their wide eyes showing nothing but disbelief except for Sirius, who only understood the last part of the explanation. Lily was now staring at her eldest son with nothing but shock. He had fought against the red dragon of the Bible. The dragon of Apocalypse itself. Tonks and Remus glanced at one another, equally stunned by those revelations. The three of them knew of the dragon but never thought that such a creature could exist. Sirius, for his part, only nodded in acceptance as he didn't know much of the Christians' myths. However, he had heard of what a dragon was capable of and was curious of how one could become the most powerful creature in existence, as the redhead beauty said. But then his attention went back to the group as another girl, the one who harbored a straight face ever since their arrival, added with a large amount of pride. And now he is one of the three strongest creatures in the supernatural world. Then to the wizards and witches' shock, the gothic little girl in appearance only gently but possessively pulled Harry into a kiss just like Rainier, Akeno and Kuroka did earlier. Lily's face reddened in indignation when her eldest son, instead of pulling her away, wholeheartedly returned the kiss. However, before she could burst, Remus cleared his throat before inquiring curiosity once everyone looked at him with interrogation. "Pardon me, but can you tell us what you meant by this statement?" "Yes, we are curious to know who are the strongest creatures out there," Tonks added with a face showing nothing but pure childish curiosity as her eyes literally sparkled in interest. Lily shot a small glare toward the werewolf as she knew he did this just to prevent her from doing what was right, mainly, scowling her eldest son for kissing someone who looked way younger than him. But she would be lying to herself if she said that Remus's question hadn't caught her interest. "You were right, Harry-kun, they really are stupid," Rainier grumbled to her lover with a roll of her eyes as she slapped her face with a hand. Harry shot the fallen angel an amused look before glaring daggers at Lily, challenging her for saying anything bad right now. Thankfully, while she looked ready to teach the girl a lesson, the English redhead backed down at the glare she was receiving. "At least, she learns her place," the raven-haired green-eyed young lord thought to himself with satisfaction before going back on topic when Rosweiss answered in a neutral tone. The Valkyrie, while showing a straight face, was clearly hiding her resentment toward the English witches and wizard, especially toward Lily. She was among the few who didn't show her direct hatred, at least physically. "The greatest and most powerful creatures are all dragons gods to be exact." "Dragons gods?" Tonks asked with a frown of confusion. "The most powerful on their kind, they are followed by the heavenly dragon Albion and Draig, then the dragon kings," Zenobia replied to the pink-haired woman who nodded in understanding. "Tiamat here is one of the dragon kings, Naya," Kuroka inquired with a cat grin as she pointed at Tiamat, who shot her an amused glare but harbored a proud smile on her face as she released a bit of her aura. "I'm sorry, what?" Sirius blurted out in shock as he stared at the Dragon King with wide eyes. Beside Lord Black, Remus, Tonks and Lily were just as stunned as they all looked at Tiamat with an expression of shock, amazement and a bit of fright as their faces were really pale. He kitty over there is right, I'm Tiamat, the Chaos Karma Dragon and one of the few Dragon Kings still active," the blue-haired beauty inquired to the fore with a grin on her face as her eyes glowed a bit. Kuroka playfully hissed at her but was ignored as she went back to cuddle with a certain raven-haired young man who, in response, scratched behind one of her cat ears much to her pleasure. Kaneko, who was feeling a bit left out, stepped closer before putting Harry's hand on top of her head with a demanding expression on her face. Needless to say, the young lord chuckled as he scratched the white Nekasha's ears, earning a soft purr of content from Sei Nekasha while Kuroka looked at her sister with fond annoyance. "Sorry to interrupt, but can we go back on point, please?" Kiba inquired the group in a neutral tone, but it was clear the blonde knight was nervous. "I second that," Remus inquired in agreement as he and Tonks shared an amused glance at the scene between Harry and the catgirls. Lily, however, had her eyes locked on them as again she was thinking that they weren't for her eldest son, especially the one who had large melons. "Yes, as I was saying before this, the three most powerful beings are all dragon gods, Great Red, the Apocalypse Dragon, Ophis the Infinite Dragon right here," Tiamat said as she pointed at the gothic little girl who kissed Harry not long ago. "Really?" Sorry, but you are pulling our legs right now, right? Sirius inquired in a blank tone as he eyed every people present around him. But then, most of them flinched when Ophis released a bit of her aura and summoned some dark snakes who coiled around her arms, hissing at the wizards and witches menacingly. At the sight of them, Lily instantly raised her wands only to see it being disintegrate by her eldest son. How he did it despite almost being at the other side of the table. Easy, he just used a bit of his elemental power, the element of lightning to be precise, to do it. And again, he understood why Akeno loved this element so much. Try that again and I will end you here and now, Harry inquired to a pale Lily Evans Potter in a cold tone that sent shivers down many spines. Akeno, being well Akeno, was shivering in pleasure at the cold tone, and Rias sent her queen an annoyed glance as it was not a good time to act S&M. But, Lily tried to say, but a glare from her eldest son was all it took to shut her up. Is that clear? He snarled at it in a growl-like tone as his eyes turned feral. Yes, the English redhead replied as she lowered her head down, but internally, she was a bit angry. Why couldn't Harry see that he was surrounded by bad people? Devils, fallen angels, dragons, no one was human. Don't get her wrong, she doesn't have problems with non-humans as she helped creating laws to their advantages, but in her opinion, humans should stay with their kind and not meddling with others. Ophis, who was still glaring daggers at the witches and wizards, calmed down when she saw her mate looking at her with those green eyes of his filled with love and care. A look she loved. A lot. Then Hedwig, who had been silent the whole time, opened her beak to let out a soothing thrill that seemed to calm down everyone in a matter of seconds. The wizards and witches all listened to the White Phoenix with attention despite not being the first time having listened to a phoenix's song. Once again, Lily wondered how Harry could have such a light creature as he was clearly not in the light side. As if she had guessed she was being talking about, Hedwig turned her noble head to stare dead inside the English redhead's eyes in a challenging manner. Lily was becoming more and more agitated the longer she stared into those amber orbs, as it was the first time a phoenix looked at her like this. She felt like a mouse under a cat's gaze, and it was not a pleasant feeling. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, always looked haughtily at everyone but never with such a predatory gaze. In fact, the red and gold fire bird looked at everyone like a protector would. But this phoenix. She looked ready to tear her down right here right now. Lily knew that it wasn't a good idea to anger a phoenix, especially a royal one like Hedwig, who were seen as the rarest of the species. One much more powerful than Fawkes will ever be. Hedwig girl, don't waste your time with her, I think a certain someone wants your attention, Harry's voice broke the moment. The noble white phoenix turned her head to look at her MSTR, who turned her head to look at someone else. Turning her own head to where Harry was looking, Hedwig saw little innocent Asia staring at her with those emerald eyes of hers in a pleading manner. Thrilling softy, Hedwig flied toward the former nun before landing right on Asia's chair back and lowering her beak down to nuzzle the top of the little blonde's hair in an affectionate manner. Asia was once again too cute for her own good. However, Lily was glancing at her eldest son with a sad look on her face as once again, he showed her how much he hated her, but giving her a brief glare and a sneer of disgust that could put her old friend Severus to shame. Anyway, you said not long ago that Harry was one of 3 strongest out there. Does that mean he is a, how did you called it? Dragon god? Sirius asked them in a curious yet serious, no pun intended manner. Thanks to this, all eyes turned away from a sad Lily to stare at a serious-looking Lord Black. Harry glanced at everyone present, wondering who will give such an information. While he didn't have any problems with Tonks, Remus and Sirius knowing about this, Lily Evans Potter was another matter. He is, Ophis replied coldly in a tone that sent shivers down the wizards' and witches' spines. The celestial dragon god of balance, peace and justice no less, Rias added with a shrug, completely ignoring or missing the small glare Harry sent her way. Sirius, Remus, Tonks and Lily stared at the raven-haired young man with complete shock. None of them had expected this. Especially Lily, who couldn't help but being a bit proud of how her eldest son turned out despite him hating her. Harry, why didn't you told us before? Lord Black asked his godson with a hurt look on his face. To be honest, it happened after you left, so, Harry replied to his godfather, whose mouth formed an "oh" before nodding in understanding. But weren't you already part lion before? Remus inquired him with a frown of confusion. I'm still in my dragon form, is a mix between a lion and a dragon and hybrid, the raven-haired young man explained in soft tone as he rubbed the back of his neck with a chuckle. From what the cat girl, Kuroka, was it? Tonks asked the black-haired Nekashu, who nodded back. You fought against Great Red, who, from what you said, is the strongest creature in the supernatural world. Have you won? Harry chuckled a bit at the question but then became serious again as he looked at his guests. I neither won nor lost against him, it was a tie at best, the raven-haired young man replied with a shrug. You almost won. Issei retorted with a roll of his eyes as he stared at him. You did gave him many wounds, Zenobia added in agreement to the pawn's words. And now you are his official rival, Rosweiss inquired in a soft tone, but it was loud enough to be heard. Once again, the wizards and witches from England stared at Harry with shock, amazement, bewilderment and many others emotions I won't describe. The raven-haired young lord, for his part, stared at everyone with a deadpan expression on his face as he said those next words. Do you really have to say that? Yes. They all replied in a teasing manner as they all looked at him minus Ophis, Elmenhild, Gasper, Hedwig, Asia and the English people with a grin on their faces. Harry's face went blank for a few seconds before he released a deep sigh while slapping his face with a hand. I hate you all. Laughers echoed a few seconds after those words left his mouth, and even Hedwig decided to join in, amused by the face her MSTR was making at the moment. Even the young ones Gasper and Asia giggled in amusement. Ophis, for her part, allowed a smile on her usually straight face. A few moments later, 3 other people joined in, Remus, Sirius and Tonks. All of them having been pulled out of their shock by the laughters, and after seeing Harry's annoyed face, couldn't retain themselves to join in as it was far too amusing to see someone with such a face. Lily, also recovered from her shock at the sound of laughters, and was now looking at her eldest son with a hidden feelings. She was proud of him from what he became, sad because she wasn't for him, but also angry at herself for accepting Albus's words. But if she hadn't, will Harry still be the one he was right now? No, he would be a proper wizard, still powerful, but surely not as much as what he was right now. If she hadn't gave him up, he would be fighting for the wizarding world and not leaving him to their fates. Many things would be different. But we cannot change the past. So the best she could now is to be there for him. Even if he didn't wanted her around him. Then Harry coughed loudly, which caused everyone to stop laughing as they all stared at him, wondering what was he going to say. We must inform our allies of this new development. Sirius, Lily, Remus and Tonks saw everyone nodded their heads with grave looks on their faces. I will go tell my Onizen and my parents. I'm sure mother will want to hear about this. Seraphal surely would want to be there as well, Rias inquired to the raven-haired young lord before she summoned a familiar red circle. Who will come with me? The redhead with aqua blue eyes inquired as she eyed the people present, but particularly her peerage. Just as she finished talking, Rosweiss, Zenobia, Issei, Kiba, and Akeno all stepped forward. I will go see Lady Sona and her peerage, Rias blonde knight inquired as he glanced at Harry, who nodded in understanding. They all saluted the raven-haired young lord one last time before they all went through the red circle. I will go fetch Arthur and Lofay. I'm sure they would want to be a part of this, Kuroka inquired as she turned into her black cat form before dashing away. At the same time, the English witches and wizards had all frozen in shock when they heard Lofay, as the last one who had this name was Merlin's legendary nemesis, Morgana Lofay. Hedwig? Can you go see Gabriel? Harry inquired to the White Phoenix, who nodded her noble head in acceptance. Smiling, Harry summoned a piece of paper and a pen in thin air, much taught he shock of the Englishes as he just performed wandless magic before writing a few lines on it. Once it was done, he tied the paper on one of Hedwig's talons before stroking her feathers in an affectionate manner. Go now, girl, he cooed softly at her, and she thrilled back at him as she opened her wings before flapping them. Once she was in the air, the noble fire bird disappeared in a burst of white flames, and one last thrill, leaving them behind. Then without wasting time, he waved his hand in a gesture that's strangely familiar to the wizards and witches present. Expecto Patronum, Harry thought as a gigantic spectral lion bursted out of his extended right hand, roaring loudly. At the sight of it, Sirius, Remus, Tonks and Lily were stunned as they couldn't help but admiring the noble creature currently standing in front of its caster, waiting. "I want you to fetch Lady Yasaka, tell her it's important, it concerned them." The spectral lion nodded his large head before rushing away with a roar, disappearing in thin air. Harry sighed deeply as he lowered his head to look at the ground, his hairs covering his eyes. "Kaneko, can you take the little ones to their rooms please?" The white-haired Nekasha blinked at the unexpected request but shrugged as she led Gasper and Asia out of the dining room, with the latter shooting a concerned glance to her older brother figure. Ravel stood there, glaring at Lily with nothing but hatred. However, after one last look at her mentor, the blonde phoenix followed after the trio. Now the only people in the dining room were Tiamat, Rainier, Elmenhild, Ophis, Harry, Remus, Sirius and Lily. "Well, if we are going to have more guests then we should go to the market," the fallen angel inquired with understanding as she glanced at Harry, who merely nodded his head. "I will come with you," Tiamat inquired as she and the fallen angel both left the mansion to the nearest supermarket. "I will be back," Ophis inquired as she went through a dark portal to who knows where. The doll-like vampire, understanding that Lord Peveril wanted to be left alone, walked toward the library without saying anything. Even if in her mind, she was overjoyed as she will have the chance to meet two of the Mouse, the leader of the Yukai faction, and a seraph. Now there were only the four witches and wizards and the owner of the mansion. "Mickey," Harry called out in a soft tone. "Mstr," Harry called for Mickey, sir. The male house elf asked his lord after he appeared in a soft pop. "Can you show them?" He pointed at Sirius, Remus and Tonks, around the mansion. "Yes, Mstr." Mickey bowed to the raven-haired young man before turning his attention to the trio. "Follow Mickey." Chuckling, Remus and Tonks went after the house elf while Sirius was looking at his godson with a frown of both suspicion and concern. He wasn't sure about leaving Harry with the woman who left him behind all those years ago. As if sensing he hadn't moved, his godson raised his head to look at Lord Black. "I will be fine, Padfoot, you can go," Harry reassured his godfather as he looked at him with a calm expression on his face. At first hesitant, Sirius soon nodded his head in reluctant acceptance before following after his longtime friend and Tonks, leaving behind Harry and Lily. A long silence followed once Sirius disappeared from the room and Lily was becoming more and more nervous at the lack of sound. "Harry, the English redhead began to say in an attempt to break the silence but was interrupted. "You can stay here for now, but once this is all over I do not want to see you again." Harry's stern tone sent shivers down her body as he turned his back at her. "Please let me dash." Lily tried to talk but once again, the green-eyed young lord. "I forgave you a long time ago for what you did." This answer froze her as it was unexpected. Really?" she asked him with disbelief. "Yes, it wasn't your fault if you gave me up. The only crime you did was listening to a senile old coot," Harry explained softly, but not once did he turn around to face her. Lily stayed silent as she didn't know what to say. "I forgave you, but I will never forget it." Harry's next words was said in a cold tone that once again scared her. "I understand," Lily whispered in a defeated tone as she looked sadly at her eldest son. "Good, as I said, you are welcome to stay for the time being, but once this whole affair is over leave the country and never return," Harry said to his former mother before leaving the dining room without saying anything else. Lily, once he disappeared, released a deep sigh filled with relief. Her eldest son was still mad at her, but at least, she can now live her life knowing that he forgave her. Sure, he still didn't wanted her around him, but she deserved it. With one last look toward where Harry disappeared, the English redhead went toward where Sirius, Remus and Tonks went, curious about how her new room would look like. Time skip. 2 hours later, Harry, who was sitting on the right side of the dining table, eyed the many people gathered around him. Once again, he had to enlarge the table and add some chairs to be sure that everyone was comfy. There were his girlfriends who were the closest to him: Ophis, Rainier, Akeno, Kuroka, Yasaka, Tiamat, Gabriel, then there were Rias, Sona and their respective peerages along with Ravel, Hedwig, Elmenhild, Sirius, Remus, Tonks and Lily. There were also two of the four Maus Surzex Lucifer and Seraphol Leviathan, Lord Zeoticus and Lady Venelana Gremory, the leader of the Yukai faction Yasaka and her daughter Kunu and finally the Seraph Gabriel. Tiamat and Rainier returned not long after they left with many bags of groceries and 1 hour and a half ago, Rias and her peerage came back with Surzex Lucifer, Graphia, and the heads of the Gremory clan along with little Millicass who apparently didn't want it to be let behind. Sona and her peerage also came and all of them harbored grim expressions on their faces. All of them knew of what had occurred not long ago and Venelana looked stern as an aura of anger and coldness radiated from her body. She wasn't the only one as Surzex, Zeoticus and Graphia looked just as angry. Sona and Tsubaki were the only ones who looked calm and reserved but it was easy to see the coldness in their eyes. The rest of the student council of Kuo Academy had narrowed eyes and Saji's fists were clenched with anger. However, everything went good as they all waited for the others to arrive so they could discuss this a little better. Not long after their arrival, more people came into the domain in the form of Gabriel, Hedwig, Kuroka, Lofei and Arthur Pendragon. The latters came as quickly as possible when the black-haired Nekashu told them about what was going on, mainly about the presence of Lily Evans Potter and the Order of the Phoenix's presence in Japan. 20 minutes later, Harry had to open the door to welcome Yasaka and her adorable daughter Kunu in his home. The leader of the Yukai faction had nothing to do at the moment so when she received Harry's Patronus, she decided it was a good time to visit him and bring her daughter with her of course. The second her eyes landed on him, Kunu lunged at Harry with a joyous smile on her face and the young lord couldn't not return it as she was just as cute as Asia. Then Yasaka and Harry exchanged a loving kiss to which Kunu said was, gross, being a child. Then at last but not least, Ophis came back alongside two primordial deities we grew to love, Muerte and Esh. Thankfully Lily wasn't in the room or she would have two vengeful goddesses on her. Why? Easy, the primordial deity of death looked mad but Esh looked pissed. Once everyone was present, Harry all lead them to the dining room where he enlarged the table and summoned more chairs. When it was done, the raven-haired young lord presented Elmenhild to everyone and the doll-like vampire had been surprised by the warm greetings she received. Then Harry asked Mickey to fetch the English wizards and witches so he could present them to the people he considered his family. The house elf wholeheartedly obeyed and came back a second later with Remus, Sirius, Tonks and Lily in town. Harry thought it was better to present the first three and left his former mom to the end even if he knew both primordial deities knew of her already. Speaking of the deities, they decided to hide in the shadows for the time being as apparently their sister Destiny forbidden them to appear in front of English wizards yet. When asked why, the deity of fate said it just wasn't the right time with no other words. A few moments later, Harry had rolled his eyes in amusement as the presentation went better than expected. Sirius and Surzex couldn't stop talking about pranks much to the displeasure of Graphia. Remus was seen chatting with Zeoticus, Venelana and Yasaka about something he couldn't heard and finally Tonks was in deep conversation with some of his girlfriends namely Akeno, Seraphol, Tiamat and Kuroka. And then trouble begins. Why? Because he had to present the last guest. Lily Evans Potter. The second her name came out of his mouth, many started to glare at her with hatred and anger. Especially the female category. Venelana, Yasaka, and Graphia looked ready to lunge at the English redhead because, being mothers themselves, the idea of abandoning their child was unthinkable. Surzex, Zeoticus, Arthur and Gabriel were all staring at Lily with coldness as themselves looked ready to destroy her on the spot. Harry had a hard time convincing everyone to calm down but he managed to do it regardless. He had to give a lot of kisses to his girlfriends for that. Lily had been outraged to see her eldest son with a woman who was clearly older than him and another bimbo at that. But knew she had no right to interfere because the redhead tried to do a single thing against them. Things would not be pretty for her. Kunu, Asia, Gasper, Ravel and Kaneko were looking at everyone present with childish curiosity, especially the former four, but each time their eyes landed on Lily, they quickly turned their heads away. While Harry had forgiven Lily, the others didn't and will never do. To change their minds, Kunu, Asia, Gasper and Ravel all decided to play some games with their favorite bird, Hedwig. And of course, the white bird wholeheartedly accepted as she grew attached to the little ones as if they were her own hatchlings. That and it reminded her of the time when Harry was just as cute. So much nostalgia. Anyway, back to present, everyone was gathered around the table, looking at Harry expectantly while some openly glared at Lily Evans Potter who was sitting near her fellow witch Nymphadora. Don't call me that, Tonks. Harry couldn't blame any of them for acting like this, so everyone in the supernatural world thought it was taboo to abandon a baby. Clearing his throat to get their attention, which did the trick, the raven-haired young lord stared at everyone as he said those words. Before we start this little assembly, I want to once again welcome everyone in Peveril Mansion. Nods of appreciation from the crowd followed those words. For the newcomers, as you probably heard, some wizards and witches from England came to Japan to retrieve me. Among them are Dumbledore, the BSTRD who ruined my life, my SPRM donor James Potter and my brother Jacob. At the mention of Dumbledore and James, cries of outrage and anger echoed from the people who recently arrived at Peveril Mansion. You heard right from what our friends here said. Harry pointed at Sirius, Remus, Tonks and Lily as he said this before resuming calmly. The letter I sent to Voldemort hadn't pleased the rest of the wizarding world. Dumbledore still believed the prophecy to be a true one and decided to force me to perform my duty as savior of the wizarding world. It was easy to detect the amount of disdain and disgust in his tone as he said this. The English wizards and witches present all flinched in fright at the cold tone but understood his point of view. However, I had been told that a majority of the Order of the Frying Chicken. An angry thrill from Hedwig interrupted him. Sorry, the Order of the Phoenix. A satisfied thrill of agreement came out of the white bird's beak. Had deserted because they do not want a war with Japan. At least some of them have some brain, Sona grumbled from her seat and her queen, Tsubaki, nodded in agreement. But a few remained. I maintain my words, Sona mumbled with a sigh. And it is possible that, as we are talking, the old coot and his clowns are here in Japan, looking for me. If you can provide me with a picture of those intruders, Harry-kun, I will immediately fortify my wards in Kyoto. Yasaka inquired to her lover with narrowed eyes as a growl escaped her throat. Harry merely glanced at Sirius who nodded. I have one on me, you are free to take it. The leader of the Yukai faction nodded her head at Lord Black who nodded back respectfully in response. Then all eyes turned to Zeoticus Gremory as he spoke those words. As administrator of Kuo Academy, you are free of classes as long as those things are still after you. But to their surprises, Harry shook his head. I appreciated your offer but I will have to decline. And why that? Do you want them to find you? Tsubaki asked from her seat as she looked at him with a frown of confusion. Yes. This answer caused everyone to froze in stunned silence as they all stared at him with wide eyes. Come again? Issei inquired him in a disbelieved tone. I want them to find me. But why? Rias asked him while his girlfriends all looked at him with narrowed eyes. In the shadows, Esh and Muerte were also wondering what their son/nephew had in mind. Because I planned to teach them a good lesson. Harry's evil grin was frightening, but for some of the people present, it caused them to also grin. What is the plan, Fufufu? Akeno cooed out as she looked at the love of her life with a sadistic smirk on her pretty face. They all leaned forward in a single movement as if they were all in the military. While Harry wanted to point it out, it was not the time for fun but for business. Well, in short, I will. Somewhere in Japan, near Kuo town. How long it would take before we find him, Albus? A frustrated James Potter asked the leader of the light with a huff. The tracking charm doesn't work. James and Fox is unable to detect him, the old wizard calmly explained to Lord Potter with hidden irritation. He was frustrated to not have the missing BRT in his clutches. How hard could it be to find one simple child? He completely ignored the fact that Harry was everything but a child at this point, being almost 18 years old and all. Dumbledore hoped that thanks to the tracking charm or even his dear Phoenix, he and his party would be able to locate the missing boy who lived and bring him back to England where he belonged, but Fates had other ideas. The old wizard was still angry over the letter the missing BRT sent to Voldemort and the implication of him having the Deathly Hallows. Legendary artifacts he had been looking for ever since he learned about them. All of this for nothing because the DM and BRT stole them. Or so he thought. Dumbledore internally smiled at what he would do to the boy once he get his hands on him. He would first erase all the things he had surely learned during his time in Japan, then he would implant false memories which would make sure that Harry would be loyal to both him and the light side. Thirdly, he would make sure that Harry died by Voldemort's hands once it was done and the Dark Lord was weakened. Then he, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, destroyed him once and for all, cementing his legend in the process as being the wizard who ended 2 Dark Lords. Thanks to this, he would become the wizarding world's mighty leader and he would reign over them like it was supposed to be. Adding with that, he wanted to become immortal so no one would take the mantle of head of the wizarding world for him. That's why he wanted the Deathly Hallows so badly. The old wizard was so deep in his thoughts that he was completely ignoring the other members of his groups who were, for the most part, looking around with cautious eyes. Arthur Weasley and Hermione Granger were the only exceptions as the two of them were looking around in amazement, curiosity and interest. The former because he was surrounded by the Muggles' technologies and the latter because she had always been curious about Japan and its culture. What about the rest of the group? Minerva McGonagall was looking around with slight interest but her mind was still over their mission, finding the boy who lived. She had horrified when she saw the boy's words on the Daily Prophet but could understand why he wouldn't want anything to do with the wizarding world. She had been there when Petunia confessed the abuse and she was also present when the Goblin Griphook told them how the boy cast himself of the Potter line to cut all ties with his parents and brother. She remembered Harry fondly. He was such a cute baby back then, always giggling and smiling. Her heart was broken when she heard what the Dursleys did to him and it had been hard for her to retain herself from hexing them to oblivion. Ever since she heard of this, her loyalty toward Albus had declined but with Voldemort now on the loose, she had to rely on him once again. After all, the only man the Dark Lord feared was Dumbledore. However, that didn't mean she would listen to his every words like she did during the previous war. She was here with the party only to see how Harry was and the young man he became after being out of England for almost a decade. Minerva knew that soon, her loyalty would change and hopefully to the better. At the same time, Molly, Ron and Ginny were looking around with disdain and the young man was muttering about how backwards the people here were compared to England. Ginny was looking at the women or the young girls and was internally jealous because of how good-looking some were. Molly Weasley, for her part, was sneering at the other females and could be heard muttering insults like, "Where's," or "harlot," under her beard. Jacob Potter, was thinking about his brother and the prospect of seeing him again after all this time. A small part of him was excited to be reunited with his brother but the biggest part wanted revenge. Revenge for stealing the title of boy who lived from him. Revenge for taking away the attention of the wizarding world. Revenge for taking his rightful fame and money. Revenge for stealing his future lordships Gryffindor, Emrys and Peveril. "Just you wait brother, soon you will be dead at my feet," Jacob inquired internally to himself with a dark grin on his face as his eyes shined with malicious attempt. James, noticing that Albus was in his own world, sighed deeply as he looked at the cleared sky above him. His mind went to Lily and how she left the Order of the Phoenix to who know where. He had tried to call her but in vain. His heart hurt a bit at this but not as much as it would have been many years ago. Ever since the night they gave up Harry, more like when he willingly gave up his eldest, their relationship went down to the point that only Jacob united them. It was sad really. James, however, refused to admit that what he did was wrong. How was he supposed to know that Harry was the chosen one and not a squib? And who was he to speak against Albus Dumbledore anyway? In his mind, Lily had betrayed the whole wizarding world by refusing to do what was right, bringing back Harry home. He had been furious when he saw the Daily Prophet and wanted to find Harry to teach him some manners and take back the lordships he took in the process. James would, of course, get rid of the Lufay and Slytherin lordships because, for him, they were dark houses. And with him being from the light side, it would be scandalous to be Lord Lefay or Lord Slytherin. Soon enough, Harry will be back in England and doing his duty to the wizarding world as it should be. As they all walked, none of them noticed the large black dog watching them before dashing away to another part of the town, making sure to not be seen by the party. Elsewhere in Kuo Town. Is everything ready? Harry asked his friends through a little device in his left ear as he pressed his body against a tree, watching people passing by. Almost Harry Kuin Naya. Just one more trap and it will be done Naya. Kuroka's voice responded in a calm but serious tone. Which one? The green-eyed black-haired young man with a curious raised brow. Not that it would be seen. The one near the fountain, Kaniko's voice replied to him in her usual monotone tone. Let's just hope Issei-kun isn't drooling over some girls instead. Fufufu, the teasing voice of his lovely girlfriend Akeno added with a giggle. This morning, Harry and his friends prepared everything to warmly welcome the wizards and witches of England. They decided it was for the best to avoid a public confrontation, so they decided to put traps in the park near Peveril Mansion. What were those traps, you may wonder? Easy, there were nothing more than little portals to send them in a reality that the primordial deity of death Muerte created for the occasion. However, to prevent innocent people to fall, they were designated so only Albus, too many names Dumbledore, and the few people who came with him could activate them. Remus, Tonks and Sirius had also decided to help and were chosen as scouts to find spy on the newcomers. Lord Black would use his animagus form, a Grim, to look around the city for any sight of the English wizards and witches. If he got a small glimpse of them, he had to go see Tonks and Lupin for warning them. Once it was done, the werewolf had to call Harry to prepare himself. Lily Evans Potter also wanted to help, but because of the distrustful glares she received from a lot of the people present, she stepped down. However, Harry had calmed everyone by saying that the English redhead could come if she wanted to, as long as she doesn't try anything against them. Otherwise, Harry gave his friends and family the free hand if Lily stepped out of line, much to the witch's terror when she saw the evil grins many harbored after those words left her eldest son's mouth. In the end, after a vote, it was decided that she would be locked in Peveril Manor under guard of the house elves. Ravel Phoenix also decided to help as she wanted to stand at her sensei's side, and while Harry was touched by the young girl's loyalty, he had declined, stating that it didn't want her to get hurt, much to her joy as he showed her how much he cared for her well-being. A part of Harry, all his girlfriends knew of the youngest Phoenix's crush on him and had talked with one another about it. None of them had any problems about it, but they wondered how long it would take for the young man to notice Ravel's crush. Arthur and Le Fay Pendragon also wanted to help, as they wanted nothing more than to confront the people who wronged their cousin. The two were currently with Rias and her peerage, waiting to be summoned. Another person who wanted to help was Elmenhild the vampire. Apparently, like the rest of her kind, the high vampires, they all had a strong disdain toward wizards and witches, especially from those of England. She didn't show it to either Sirius, Tonks or Lily, but tolerated the formers as they were in good term with Harry. Lily was another story, and each time her eyes landed on the English redhead, a disgusted sneer would grow on her cute little face. Needless to say that Lily was wary around the vampire, if not a bit intimidated. Remus was another problem, as he was a werewolf. Knowing the strong hatred between vampires and werewolves, Harry forced the two to at least tolerate one another until this whole thing was over. The two reluctantly agreed, and since then, stayed as far from one another as possible. It was working so far. The only things that wouldn't change were the hateful glares. Back to present, Sirius had not appeared, and some of the watchers were bored to death. In the park, they were only Harry, Akeno, Kaniko and Kuroka. The rest of Harry's girlfriends Yasaka, Gabriel, Ophis, and Rainier were all in the world Muerte created, waiting patiently for their guests to arrive. Harry was situated at the south part of the park, Kaniko at the east, Akeno at the north and Kuroka at the west. Each of them cautiously looking around for any sight of their targets. Rias and the rest of her peerage were at the Occult Research Club, waiting alongside Sona and her own peerage. It had been decided that the second Sirius's report came, Harry would send Hedwig to warn them so they could all go to confront the English undesirables. Of course some people would also be there, however, they will be present only to observe and take notes. Seraphol and Surzex along with the great Seraph Michael wanted to see how wizards and witches from England operated, especially in combat. It was 100% sure there would be one before the end of the day. Michael, ever since he heard of the existence of an unknown branch of magic users, had wanted to study them, but because of his position he didn't have much chance to. Thanks to Gabriel and her connection with Lord Harry Peveril, Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, Emery's Lofay, a mouthful name it was, that's for sure, he learned a bit of the kind of magic the wizarding world performed on a daily basis. Azazel, the leader of the fallen angels, had also wanted to come and observe, but Harry had been adamant in having him around. The green-eyed black-haired young still didn't trusted him even if it had been some time since the battle with Kokabeel and his cronies. However, that didn't stop Surzex to promise the literally pouting fallen angel to send him some notes after the events. A part of the two mouse, Azazel or Bird Brain as Harry called him, and Michael, two other beings will also be present. Two powerful beings who were there at the beginning of time, the primordial deities of life Esh and death Muerte themselves. Both of them wanted to see how Harry would humiliate those annoying pests of wizards and witches. Muerte hoped that some of those annoyances would die so she could send them to their proper place, Oblivion. It was a dark place similar to the nothingness where spirits faded into existence and whose memory will forever be forgotten. That's the place Voldemort and Albus Dumbledore will end up once they died. The former of the two didn't know it, but soon enough he will meet his end in a really terrible manner too. Snakeface didn't know that when he reabsorbed his Horcruxes, he had accidentally absorbed something else. Indeed, Muerte, who was still furious at him for avoiding his judgment, had cursed the remaining Horcruxes. How? When she purged the locket and the diadem along with Harry's scar, of course, she planted a small curse in the dark essence. The curse was implanted in the remaining Horcruxes thanks to the connection with the one who made them, and now he will have to suffer for trying to cheat death. What was the curse, you may wonder? Well, you will wait and see. Yes, I love annoying you guys. A dark grin grew on her face every time she thought of the suffering the so-called Dark Lord will endure. In fact, the curse was supposed to take full effect the second Albus Too Many Names Dumbledore died. You know what they say, killing two birds with one stone. However, in this case, it would be instead killing two Dark Lords with one stone. Esh too wanted to see Dumbledore suffer, as he was because of him that her beloved son Harry Peveril, Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, Emery's Lofay endured 9 years of torture instead of a happy childhood. She also wanted to see James Potter suffer because of how much of a terrible father he was. Apparently he hadn't hesitated to abandon his own flesh and blood when he heard from the old coot that Harry was a squib. Like her sister, she had stopped caring for the wizarding world as a whole after the abandonment of her baby boy. In fact, she would love to see them going extinct. At first, both deities pitted them because of the witches' hunts, but now, they were nothing more than arrogant people who saw themselves as the top dogs because they had what the humans didn't possess, magic. If they had the power too, both Esh and Muerte would happily strp them of their magic, but they couldn't. Many gods and goddesses of magics were killed by the biblical God and his angels a long time ago. A few still lived, but they stayed mostly hidden to their own territories. However, they both knew that things were going to the better once both Voldemort and Albus Dumbledore left the world of the livings. Why? Because once it would be done, the two of them would send dreams to the many sentient magical creatures in England such as centaurs, fairies, and the like, so they could take down the Ministry of Magic and hopefully create a better world where wizards, witches and magical creatures would live together. But what of the Death Eaters? They won't be a problem because once Voldemort will be out of the game, his cronies will follow after him. The Dark Mark linked all of them to Snakeface, so the moment he died they will follow afterwards. The Dark faction will be destroyed in a matter of seconds. The Light faction will also be severely damaged once news of Dumbledore's death will reach them, but the deities didn't care. What mattered to them was to get rid of the world from too big annoyance. Esh and Muerte couldn't wait for these two to finally face judgment. Unknown to everyone, a certain primordial deity of fate would also be there to watch, but from her realm. She had been waiting for this day to come, and soon, villains will met their fates and the wizarding world will enter a new golden age where bigotry and prejudices will be erased from existence. Back to the park, Harry was still leaning against a tree, waiting for Remus's signal. He was still thinking about the coming confrontation with his former father James, I'm an idiot, Potter, his own sibling and the old coot Albus Dumbledore. While he couldn't wait to teach them all a lesson, Harry was reluctant to hurt his brother. He had never blamed him for his abandonment or even for the bad things he endured in his youth. In fact, he was looking forward to meet Jacob and possibly creating a bond with him. If only he knew that the former boy who lived wanted nothing to do with him but instead end his life. His mind then went back to the people accompanying the old coot and his former family. It was planned that his friends would deal with them while he take care of Dumbledore and James Potter. Those two were the reasons of his sufferings with the Dursleys. If this confrontation happened a year or more ago, he would have slaughtered them all without mercy, but after his fight with his dark side Duncan, all envy of revenge disappeared. Now, he wanted to make them suffer, and if they died in the process then so be it. Dumbledore deserved to die because the old coot was more dangerous than he let on. While not as powerful as him, the old wizard was a MSTR in manipulation and because of that, became really influent in the wizarding world to the point when no one disobeyed him. As for James, the head of House Potter deserved to suffer for willingly giving up his child, but Harry won't kill him unless he tried something stupid that it. His thoughts were interrupted by Issei's voice speaking to him through the small device in his ear. Hey pal. The trap is activated. I'm returning to the club. Okay, thank Dash, Harry began to say to the brown-haired perv before another voice, this time Remus's, echoed through the device. Harry. They are coming to you from the west. Thanks you Moony. He replied back with a serious tone and contained excitation. The game was on. Smirking, Harry then used the device to call the others and give them the news. Guys. The targets are coming from the west. Understood, Kaniko's blunt answer caused him to chuckle a bit in fondness. Thanks for the info Harry-kun Naya, the black-haired Nekasha replied with satisfaction clear in her voice. Unlike a certain someone. Aw poo. Why couldn't they come from my side? Akeno's disappointed whine caused him to roll his eyes in amusement. Maybe because that where I am I'm prettier than you after all Naya, Kuroka replied with smugness and a bit of playful arrogance in her tone. Harry chuckled a bit when he heard Akeno grumbling something at this remark. Girls please, you are both appealing, so stop acting like children and stay focused or else no cuddles tonight, he inquired with false sternness. Moo Harry-kun, you are so mean fufufu, Akeno in pleasure. Yes. How could you do this to us Naya? Kuroka added teasingly in false sadness. Should have kept my mouth shut, Harry grumbled to himself with embarrassment. Indeed you should have Naya. Both young women said in perfect synchronization before giggling madly in amusement. I hate you both, Harry inquired with false annoyance. Love you too Naya. Akeno and Kuroka replied through the device, giggling madly. The green-eyed black-haired young man rolled his eyes before his eyes suddenly fell on a young couple passing not too far from him. With them was an adorable little girl who looked barely older than 5 or 6 years old, maybe 7 at most. Seeing them playing and laughing together brought a smile on his face. Ever since he was little, Harry had always wanted to have a big family. His dreams was slowly turning into motion as he had a lot of friends and appealing girlfriends to be proud of. Maybe one day, he would become a father. Either the baby was a girl or a boy, he didn't care as it would still be family. He had planned, after the whole dealing with Dumble and his idiots, to propose to some of his girlfriends. Thanks to his ancestors' vaults, he had enough money to buy 8 engagement rings from a jeweler not too far from Kuo Academy. He went there some days ago when the girls Kuroka, Rainair and Tiamat went out to do groceries. Yasaka was doing her usual business in Kyoto and Gabriel was doing what seraphs usually do. Akeno was doing her duty as queen of Rias peerage and office. He didn't know what she was doing at the time. He hoped that the girls would love the rings he brought for them, and deep in his heart, he also prayed that there won't be any rejections. Not that he thought they would, but better safe than worry. But then his whole attention shifted away from the laughing family to focus on the device in his left ear or on the voice speaking to him through it. "I see them," Kuroka's voice said with firmness. "Are you sure?" Harry asked her with a frown. "Yes. Hard to miss, as one of the adults look clearly like you except with hazel eyes, or the oldest one has a really big beard and ridiculous clothes." Snorting at how the Nekashu described James Potter and Albus Dumbledore, Harry then looked up to see his familiar Hedwig in all her glory. She had the power to look invisible to mortals' eyes, and she was using it right now to not be seen by the people in the park. "You know what to do." Appealing, Harry cooed at her affectionately with a fond smile on his face. Hedwig thrilled at him while ruffling her feathers with pride before disappearing in a burst of flame. Harry rolled his eyes in amusement at his phoenix's antic as he knew he once again stroked her ego before heading toward the fountain with a dark grin on his face. Once he was there, memories of Raynair's attack on Issei passed through his mind, but he quickly shut them out before hiding among the leaves of a nearby tree while using a bit of his dragon god's power to become invisible, not literally of course. His emerald green eyes scanned the area before releasing a tiny bit of his aura. For someone magical from the wizarding world, this aura would be similar to a standard wizard of England, if not as strong as a certain headmaster we all love. The bait was placed now. All he had to do was waiting for the targets to come straight to him. At the same time, Albus Dumbledore, who was leading the group, suddenly froze as he felt something in the air, a powerful aura. Could it be? The old fool asked softly to himself with no small amount of hope until someone spoke. "Did you feel that, Albus?" James asked the old wizard as himself felt it. "I did." James the First did, Albus mumbled absently to Lord Potter as his eyes were focused toward where that came from. "The area that the Muggle called a park. Do you think it is him, Albus?" Minerva asked the older wizard with hope in her eyes. "It might also be a Japan aura, but it doesn't hurt to take a look," Dumbledore inquired to his party before making his way into the park. Glancing at his companions, James Potter soon followed after him, then Minerva, then the Weasley parents, leaving only Jacob, Ginny, Ron and Hermione behind. "Do you think it is really your brother?" "This aura is powerful," the bushy-haired girl inquired to her friends with some awe. "Not near as powerful as Dumbledore," Ron replied with confidence as he dismissed Hermione's words. "Maybe not as much, but it is powerful." Ginny reluctantly agreed with the bushy-haired girl's statement while glaring at where it came from. Jacob, for his part, ignored them completely as he had made a few steps toward the park, thinking to himself. "Soon, brother, soon," he whispered to himself with dark satisfaction as he clutched his wand well hidden in his shirt. He was itching to curse the one who stole him everything. Realizing that Jacob wasn't with them, Hermione, Ginny and Ron quickly went after him, no wanting to be left behind. Dumbledore, who was walking ahead of everyone, looked around for any clue of the missing boy's whereabouts while trying to find the source of the powerful aura he felt a few moments ago. The only he could say was that it was coming from the middle of the park or somewhere close by. James and the rest of the order were following their leaders, sure that the older wizard knew where he was going while hoping to find their target so they could leave Japan to return to their beloved England. Unknown to them, someone was following their movements. Kuroka, the black-haired Nekashu. However, to make sure to not get caught, she decided to transform into her cat form so she could spy on them without being spotted. Back to the wizards and witches, they followed Albus all the way through the park. Some people would give them odd looks as they passed by, but they were mostly ignored until the leader of the light stopped not too far away from a large fountain. The same one Issei was when he was almost killed by Raynair. The old wizard scanned the area, humming in concentration as not too far away Harry was watching them with narrowed eyes. He had seen them coming and was still stunned by how they were clothed. Those clothes were out of time. It would have worked if they were in the 1960s, but it is not the case for F's sake. Shaking his head to get rid of those thoughts, Harry then turned his emerald green eyes toward the rest of the old Coots group and instantly recognized James Potter among the crew. Hard to miss when the guy looked a bit like yourself but uglier. Then Harry's eyes landed on the boy with red hair similar to Lily's and hazel eyes. It was Jacob Potter, his twin brother and the previously boy who lived. At first glance, there were many differences between the two brothers. Physically, Jacob was well larger than Harry. He had some muscles, yes, but there were still some fat left belly and cheeks. Jacob was also smaller than his brother, 5 feet 5 inches against 5 feet 9 inches, or even if Father James 5 feet 6 inches. Harry then turned away from his brother to look at the other young people following him. Two of them had the same hair color, so it wasn't difficult to assume that they were possibly brother and sister, but the last one was a brown bushy-haired girl with brown hairs. The orange-haired girl had her arm coiled with Jacob's, so Harry assumed that the two were a couple. While she was good-looking, she was a far cry from the girls Harry was currently dating. The bushy-haired girl, however, seemed to keep an eye on Jacob. Frowning, Harry was wondering if either she was attracted by his brother or she was simply the sister figure. Shrugging, the black-haired emerald-eyed young man's attention went back to James when Lord Potter opened his mouth to speak with the oldest wizard of the group. "Albus, why are we stopping? I don't see Harry anywhere." "And you won't see me until later," Harry said internally to himself with a shark-like grin as he slowly pointed at the area behind him before using his draconic powers to teleport his aura away. Albus, who was about to answer, suddenly froze as he sharply turned his head, a movement that would usually cause someone to develop a stiff neck toward where the newly released aura came from. "This way!" The old fool cried out to his comrades, too blinded by the prospect of finding his weapon to care if this was a trap or not anymore. Instantly the rest of the crew went after him, everyone wearing determined expressions on their faces. However, they barely made a few steps that they found themselves frozen in place. Kuroka, who had been following the group since they stepped into the park, smirked toothily as she watched them struggling before heading toward where her love was to have a better place to enjoy the show. Hermione saw the black cat passing by and wanted nothing more than to hug and pet it. She was a cat person but was unable to move, so she was very disappointed. But then her mind went back to their current problem, their lack of mobility. "By Merlin, what's going on?" James Potter cried out in surprise as he tried to move but to no avail. "What in Merlin's beard is that thing?" Ron cried out in shock and alarm as he looked at his feet. The rest of the crew quickly followed his example before gasping at what they saw. Instead of the dirty ground they walked on, was what looked like a small pool of shadows. Their feet were non-existent, as if they were eaten by the pool like quicksand. "It's a trap," Arthur Weasley inquired with realization as he looked at everyone with wide eyes. "No SHT, Sherlock. What a good sense of observation," Harry thought in amusement as he watched the scene from his perch. Soon, he was joined by certain black cat who instantly placed herself on his shoulders, purring in content. Smiling fondly at her, Harry reached out to scratch the top of her head, which earned him a loud purr from the little furball. Smirking in amusement at his feline lover, the black-haired emerald-eyed young man looked back at the group before snapping his fingers. Instantly, the English wizards and witches found themselves falling through a shadowy tunnel, screaming. Laughing at this, Harry then touched the device in his ear before saying, "Kaneko, go warn the others. The show is on. I repeat, the show is on." "Understood." Kaneko replied bluntly before someone else took over. "I can't wait to have some fun fufufu," Akeno cooed sadistically through the device. Harry smirked evilly after hearing this and looked down at Kuroka, who had a Cheshire grin in response. Now all they had to do was retrieving some people before leaving. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 17. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lionheart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.